Saudi Arabia already had a national airline. Saudia has been flying since 1945, which makes it one of the oldest carriers in the Middle East. It operates over 160 aircraft today, which means it's not a small operation by any standard. And yet, in March 2023, the Saudi government announced they were building a brand new airline from scratch, which sounds like something you'd only do if the first one had completely failed. But Saudia hadn't failed, so why build another one? To understand it, you need to go back to where Saudia actually came from, because in 1945, the airline didn't start as a commercial operation. It started as a gift. Franklin D. Roosevelt gave King Abdul Aziz a DC-3 at the end of World War II, which meant the very first aircraft in Saudi aviation was literally donated by the American president. The airline that grew out of that gift became deeply tied to the identity of the kingdom itself, which meant it was always going to carry more than just passengers. For decades, Saudia's biggest business wasn't connecting Riyadh to London or Singapore. It was moving millions of pilgrims to Mecca. Every year, the Hajj brings up to 2 million Muslims to Jeddah from every corner of the world, and Saudia owned that market completely, which meant its entire operation, its routes, its culture, its identity, was built around Jeddah and the holy cities, not around competing with Emirates or Qatar Airways. Look at what that actually means for an airline trying to go global, because Saudia serves alcohol-free cabins, which is a religious requirement, not a preference. Emirates serves Dom Pamperone in business class. Qatar Airways has an onboard bar. You can modernize the seats, you can update the livery, but you cannot serve champagne without fundamentally changing what the airline represents to the people it was built to serve. And this is where Saudi Arabia's leadership made a decision that was quietly brilliant. They didn't try to change Saudia. They decided it couldn't be turned into an Emirates competitor without destroying the thing that made it essential. So instead of fixing one airline, they built a second one that had none of the baggage. Riyadh Air started in 2023, with zero history, zero legacy passengers, zero obligation to Mecca. Saudi Aviation's head of strategy explained it directly. Jeddah is the gateway to the holy mosques, Riyadh is the business hub, and they require different products. But here's where the scale of what Saudi Arabia is attempting becomes genuinely staggering. In 2023, Saudi airports handled around 107 million passengers, which sounds large until you realize the government's Vision 2030 target is 300 million passengers annually by 2030. That's nearly 3 times the current number in under a decade. One airline cannot absorb that. 2 airlines with different hubs targeting different passengers, that's a different equation. Riyadh sits roughly 4,800 kilometers from London and about 5,900 kilometers from Singapore, which puts it in almost exactly the same geographic sweet spot as Dubai. Passengers flying from Europe to Southeast Asia, from Africa to India, from the UK to Australia. Riyadh sits in the middle of nearly all of those routes. Saudi Arabia had the geography the entire time. What it never had was the infrastructure to exploit it. So Riyadh Air is the infrastructure, and the way they built it tells you exactly how seriously they're taking this. The airline hired Tony Douglas as CEO, which matters because Douglas was the previous chief executive of Etihad Airways, which means he spent years inside one of the Gulf's biggest carriers, learning precisely where those operations were vulnerable. He didn't come in guessing, he came in with a diagnosis. And then look at the fleet choices, because this is where the strategy becomes visible. Riyadh Air ordered 39 Boeing 787-9 Dreamliners, then 60 Airbus A321neos for regional routes, and then at the 2025 Paris Air Show, they added 25 Airbus A350-1000s, bringing their total order book to over 180 aircraft. Now, compare that to Emirates, which built its empire on the A380, which carries over 500 passengers and requires filling those seats to make a route profitable. Riyadh Air ordered 0 A380s, which means it can profitably fly routes that Emirates would never consider because the passenger numbers are too thin to fill a double-decker jet. That's not a coincidence. That's a deliberate architectural choice to build the anti-Emirates. Now, here's the part that took longer than anyone expected, because the launch story is actually a story about Boeing. Riyadh Air had planned to start flying in early 2025, just 2 years after announcing the airline. But Boeing's production problems pushed delivery timelines back repeatedly. By October 2025, Riyadh Air was flying a leased aircraft to London Heathrow, but only for employees and government fund staff. It wasn't really a launch, it was a rehearsal. And then on May 19, 2026, public ticket sales opened. The first commercial flight was set for July 1, 2026, from Riyadh to London Heathrow, using Riyadh Air's first newly delivered 787-9 in its full purple livery. 3 years after announcing the airline, the first paying passenger could finally book a seat. Starting fare sat around $950 for economy and $6,500 for business class, putting Riyadh Air directly in the price range of Emirates and Qatar Airways from day one. But there's still the question nobody has fully answered, which is whether this airline can compete at the premium end without serving alcohol. Emirates has the bar and the shower. Qatar has the Q Suite and the Dom Perignon. Riyadh Air has to win on everything else: the hardware, the hospitality, the price, the schedule, to make up for the one thing it structurally cannot offer. And that gap sits at the center of everything Riyadh Air is trying to do. So the question of why Saudi Arabia built Riyadh Air when it already had Saudia turns out to have a very simple answer. Saudia couldn't be the airline Saudi Arabia needed, not because it was failing, but because of exactly what it was. An airline built around Mecca cannot also be built around competing with Emirates. The identity that made it essential is the same identity that made it impossible to transform. So they didn't transform it. They built something new next to it, and let both of them be exactly what they were designed to be. Emirates took 30 years to build what it has. Qatar Airways took 20. Riyadh Air is trying to do it faster, with more money, on better geography, and with the lessons of every mistake those carriers already made. Whether that's enough, the skies will answer that question.